So I love using my MacBook every single day. I think it's probably one of the more reliable products that Apple tend to make. But when this brand new M4 iPad Pro came out, I thought if Apple's going to make the thinnest ever device ever created by the company and put an M4 chip inside of it, I'm going to be the first person to buy it and see if it's worth replacing my MacBook with. Using it, there's been a lot of positive and negative results, and in this video I want to break those down and explain if this device right here is worthy of the name Pro and can actually handle that M4 chip. So should you buy a MacBook? Should you buy an iPad? Well, stay to the end of the video and you'll find out. So what makes this iPad so special? For me, it has to be one thing that Apple did that was particularly strange, and that is introducing the brand new M4 Apple Silicon chip in an iPad and not a Mac. You see, when Apple usually introduce new generations of Apple Silicon, it's supposed to come out inside of a Mac so that developers and programmers can maximize its potential. Introducing the brand new M4 on the iPad makes sense to differentiate it from the iPad Air and get more people buying this device, but I just don't think the iPad OS can take advantage of this chip. Like, even though it's a 9-core CPU and a 10-core GPU with 8 gigs of unified memory, it's fast and snappy, but the software and the apps that are capable of being downloaded on this device just don't let you maximize and take advantage of its power. For example, Final Cut Pro is something I use all the time to edit all of these videos, and on my Mac it works great. It has a great, interface, but on the iPad it's like a blown up version of an iPhone, and so the mobile version of that app just isn't quite as well tuned as something like a MacBook. Even things like Google Chrome, something that uses a lot of RAM, a lot of power, and can take advantage of a more powerful processor, it's just very, very poorly done on the iPad. It's a big version of the iPhone. It's a mobile app. The only proper computing app you get is Safari. Even downloads from those browsers are not as optimized as they are on something like a computer or a desktop. And so the M4 processor might have all its great quirks and features, but on the iPad it's just so limited and restricted that you can't take advantage of it. And the worst thing about it is you can only get the more powerful version of this M4 processor with the 2 or 1 terabyte iPads with like an extra core with the CPU going from 9 to 10, and like double the RAM from 8 to 16. And if you want that power, you have to spend so much more just on a higher storage device, which isn't the same with the Macs. And for that reason, as nice as it might be getting an M4 processor in this iPad, I just don't think it makes much of a difference from the M1 or the M2, because they're all just as fast and they're practically the same thing. Now, while those internal changes in this iPad don't make the biggest difference in the world, and to me are kind of just specs on a piece of paper, what really makes it special is how Apple has engineered this thing. At only 5.1 millimeters thin, the 13-inch model is the thinnest iPad or the thinnest Apple product to have ever been created. And not only could I not physically understand how Apple has just made a computer that's only a couple sheets of paper thick, but I don't think my camera could comprehend it either, because when I was unboxing this thing, my camera failed to focus on it when I was trying to get the side profile of this iPad, which is unbelievable. However, it being thinner does allow for a lot of functionality benefits. So for me, I found it to be a lot lighter and easier to carry around, which is super good and very, very helpful when you're taking it to school or when you're taking it to work or just using it in bed. But more importantly, I think there is a downside to a thinner device, and that is, in this case, the speakers. With the previous M1 and M2 iPad Pro, the speakers just had a bit more bass because the device was a bit thicker. With this, because it's so much thinner, it's a bit harder to get that level of bass, and that is a slight downgrade, but I personally would pick this thin device over any slight mishap with the speakers because it's so much more convenient than what I previously used. Now, in such a thin device, to upgrade the display properly takes a lot of engineering, and Apple have implemented an OLED display in here, which I like to use a lot more than my MacBook, even though this is a proper computer, because OLED has many benefits. It's got deeper blacks, which mini LED in the previous iPads and this MacBook does have. However, it avoids the issue of blooming. So when you watch something with a dark background, I found that with mini LED in the iPads previously and the MacBook that I have here, they would be like a weird glow or a hazy effect behind an object in a movie or a TV show. But on this iPad right here, the OLED display just completely removes that issue. And more importantly, I find it to be a bit more color accurate. It's a bit warmer and just looks more nicer to the eye. Now, to achieve such crazy results in the display, Apple have had to do something called tandem OLED, which is basically two OLED panels stacked on top of each other in such a thin device. These two OLED panels allow for the super bright display at 1000 nits of brightness and 1600 nits at peak brightness on HDR content, which is the same as the previous devices, but to do that on OLED is a challenge, and the way Apple have engineered it is super cool. Looking at this iPad physically, the only other changes I would have liked is for the bezels to have been a bit thinner, because I think when you make the bezels thinner, the device looks a little bit newer, a little bit more futuristic. Right now, if you were to put this next to the previous iPad, it looks exactly the same unless you look at it from the side. The only other thing physically that you can get on the display is a matte textured glass, which again, Apple has decided to, for some reason, only give you the option to do that with the 1 or 2 terabyte iPad. Otherwise, with the 256 and 512, you have to stick with a glossy display. I personally think the glossy is better. It allows the content that you're watching to be a bit more colorful and saturated. But still, if people are working outside and they want that nano textured option, you got to pay so much more money, which is just a bit of a rip-off. Now, the only benefit with the camera is that the front facing has been moved to the horizontal position, even though we do lose that rear facing wide angle lens. Moving that front-facing camera to the horizontal position means FaceTime is a bit more easier on the iPad because most people use it in landscape mode, and so when it's attached to the Magic Keyboard, your face isn't quite dwarfed to the side. But other than that, physically and structurally, these are the only changes, and most people aren't going to notice them on a daily basis apart from how thin it is. Now, is that thinness worth upgrading from the previous iPad? Probably not, but it does outweigh the cost of carrying such a thick MacBook around everywhere. So when it comes to the design, I definitely notice it, and I do feel the futuristic upgrades that Apple has made. Now, the iPad experience would not be complete without its accessories that truly make it a computing device, and that's the new Magic Keyboard and Apple Pencil Pro. Now, when it comes to the Magic Keyboard, I do like the changes that Apple have made. First of all, the function row is back. Well, there was no function row to start with, but it should have been there anyways. You can finally change the brightness, change the volume just like a MacBook, and the base of the keyboard is now aluminium, so it does feel super premium and matches the back of the iPad depending if you get the space black or the silver. On top of that, the trackpad has now got haptic feedback, which is super cool. It doesn't feel as weird and unstable as the previous keyboard. And it is a lot lighter because I think the hinge is a bit more flat, and the way it's been engineered does allow you to carry the iPad and the keyboard with a lot more comfort, which I think is super important considering that the keyboard weighs more than the iPad. So for that reason, Apple have gone in the right direction, making it easier to carry. However, there's still a lot of problems with this thing. Number one, the exterior material. I still don't know why Apple makes this out of this weird cheap rubber. Like, it always attracts fingerprints, it always attracts dust, and I just think longevity wise it's just not going to last, especially the edges. The edges just stick out and are very sharp and uncomfortable, and I've noticed on the previous iPad, the white Magic Keyboard case, the edges start to peel, so I don't know what this one's going to look like in a couple years. On top of that, a MacBook lid is easy to open because there's a cutout on the base. Like, you can put your nail or your finger through it and open the lid. With the iPad, I have always had this issue with the Magic Keyboard where I have to like get the iPad and the keyboard and start like putting it on a table in this awkward position just to open it. And I think if Apple can, on the keyboard, they should add some sort of hinge at the bottom so you can just easily open it with one finger. But other than that, the keyboard is the keyboard. It makes the experience a little bit nicer. Oh, the only other thing that I also noticed was when I was using the iPad in bed watching a film, the top of the iPad being heavier than the bottom makes it extremely top heavy. So you have to bend it and tilt it in a way that stops the iPad from falling back on a soft surface like a bed, which again makes me think, does the MacBook feel better to use as a computer versus the iPad? Because there's a lot of practical issues. So the Magic Keyboard is cool, but still a lot of area and a lot of room for improvement needed. The Apple Pencil Pro maintains to be an accessory that in my opinion is only for a small group of people, them being students who like to handwrite or artists doing work that needs a lot of precision. But the new Apple Pencil Pro, that's also an accessory for this iPad exclusively, not for the other iPads, is something that hasn't received the upgrades that I think we were all waiting for in a pencil. I would have liked to have seen a rubber on the back of the Apple Pencil that lets you rub anything very easily. I think that would have been super cool. Or I would have liked to have seen it come in new colors like black, especially considering that this is a Pro device. But Apple's new squeeze feature, giving you a haptic response when drawing something, being able to squeeze the pencil and get a menu with an array of things to do, like change the font, the color. I think that's better than going to the menu at the bottom of the Notes app. And just the general haptic feedbacks and tracking that you get on the iPad is pretty cool. On the whole though, I don't think it's really a great upgrade, and it doesn't have any benefit or purpose to me that is better than using a MacBook. Personally, the pencil just doesn't serve much of a purpose. So if it's for you and you need it to write something, go for it. Otherwise, I wouldn't really recommend it to most people. So with all the accessories and the new features of the iPad taken into account, it leads me to a very difficult conclusion, because on one hand, people may enjoy using this massive multi-touch display to do all their work, because it is fun to have a touch screen and a huge thin device to use on a daily basis. But I just think that with all the limitations from the software of this device, it's not taking advantage of that chip, and that is why I would always stick to a MacBook for my work. More importantly, I think the value of this device just isn't there compared to the various different MacBooks that Apple offers. So if you look at something like a MacBook Air, even though you're missing out on that mini LED display, I think that most people won't notice that. And at a price of what, £1,299, you're getting the M3 processor and double the storage at 512 gigs, yet at a much cheaper price, and an actual physical computer. An iPad of this level, this one particularly, the base model with the keyboard and pencil, cost me nearly upwards of £1,700, nearly £1,800, which is a lot of money. And considering that a much cheaper device from Apple can allow you to do more with the same level of processing power, to me means that this iPad just isn't quite there when it comes to it being a computer. So therefore, I personally, I'm always going to stick with my MacBook. Switching to this iPad has been a lot of fun, and I may still use it to edit my thumbnails. I know that's crazy to say on an £1,800 device. I'm just going to sit there drawing thumbnails, but I think that's really the only utility it has, and most people I talk to play games on it or watch movies and use their MacBook for all the real work. So I'm going to be a MacBook guy to the end. I don't think I'm going to be permanently switching to it anytime soon. So if you guys enjoyed this video, drop a like down below. Let me know in the comments if you prefer the iPad over the MacBook, or if you disagree to any of the things I've said. And make sure to subscribe to this channel to stay tuned for future uploads. Otherwise, thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.